So over the past year, you and I have learned that the Hyundai IONIQ 5 is by far the best EV on the market today, full stop. So much so, myself and 90 other jurors voted it the World Car of the Year. So if you're Hyundai, what do you do as a follow-up? You obviously can't go to Disney World, so maybe you take the bits from that car, put it underneath a different carrying case, one that doesn't sell as well. So what exactly is this? Well, one look at it, yes, it's a sedan, but it's called the Hyundai IONIQ 6. And what they've done is they've taken the platform from the Hyundai IONIQ 5, which is sort of a crossover, and put it in a sedan carrying case. However, what's unique here is it's got the same packaging trick that the Hyundai IONIQ 5 has, and that is a very long wheelbase and a very short overall length. Now, what does that mean here? That means you take the wheelbase of a car like a 5 Series or an E-Class, that is a mid-size car, and you put it in the overall framework, meaning the size of a car that's somewhere between the length of a Honda Civic and a Honda Accord. In fact, this is 5 inches shorter than a Honda Accord. Now, why is that important? Well, as you and I have discussed in many episodes, this is the place where you package a lot of people and a lot of dogs. So in an instance where the vehicle is now shorter, it can package more people and more dogs. Now we need to press on to the first aspect that is shared with the Hyundai IONIQ 5, and that is the propulsion system. For the avoidance of doubt, this is a fully electric vehicle, and it's on offer in 2 different flavors. There is a 2-wheel drive, which is rear-wheel drive, and then there's this, the all-wheel drive. Now the 2-wheel drive, that has a 168 kilowatt motor in the rear, which translates to 225 horsepower and 258 pounds of torque. Then there's this, the all-wheel drive, which adds a 74 kilowatt motor in the front. That's about 99 extra horsepower. So total system horsepower in the all-wheel drive is 320, and the torque 446. Now we do have to clear up some confusion from our many Hyundai IONIQ 5 as well as Kia EV6 episodes, and that would be the frunk. Many of you commented in those episodes that the 2-wheel drive should have a bigger frunk, when in reality, at least in the US, the frunk between the two is the same. And at that, if I'm really taking a stab in the dark here, this can package maybe a laptop bag. At that, it would be a MacBook Air and not a MacBook Pro. And that, of course, brings us to the second aspect that this shares with the Hyundai IONIQ 5, which would be the battery. 77.4 kilowatt hours that works in conjunction with an onboard charger that's 10.9 kilowatts. That also works in conjunction with a battery heater to get the battery to the optimal temperature when charging in cold weather. Now, something very important here. The range is different from the Hyundai IONIQ 5. The range for the 2-wheel drive, 340 miles. The range for this, the all-wheel drive, 310. In the case of the Hyundai IONIQ 5, that would be 280 for the all-wheel drive and 320 for the rear-wheel drive. Okay, so that's all fine and good, but how is it possible? Answer: the design. And here we have to separate out this discussion in the facts as well as the aesthetics of the design. We'll take the aesthetics and we'll discuss that at the end of the episode. Here are the facts of the coefficient of drag. A Hyundai IONIQ 5 is almost 0.29 coefficient of drag. This is 0.22 coefficient of drag. In the world of aerodynamics, that is orders of magnitude different, and why this vehicle has an appreciable difference in the range. Now, one thing that's also different here that you do need to understand impacts range, that's the size of the wheels. This is on offer with 18s and 20s. Obviously, the rear drive is fitted with the 18s. The fancy all-wheel drive like this is fitted with the 20s. That impacts the range. So the combination of a decrease in the coefficient of drag, even with the larger wheels and tires, does bring the range up to 310 in the more powerful all-wheel drive model. Now, admittedly, the range is a huge aspect for any electric vehicle, but the coefficient of drag just didn't impact the range in this case. It also impacted the way the car had to look. Again, talking facts, not aesthetics of design. This has a low front and a low rear, very different from what we've seen in many cars coming out of Europe since forever, as well as newer designs coming from Asian manufacturers. And the reason why they had to do this design, including aerodynamic shutters that open and close like the IONIQ 5, they had to improve the overall efficiency. Now, the biggest change that impacted that 2.2 coefficient of drag is the rear of the vehicle. And here, I cannot help but thinking Infiniti J30 from back in the day. Now, granted, there's some changes here. They've got this almost like biplane-esque rear spoiler situation, and that is used to clean up the way the air leaves the vehicle so the overall vehicle can cut through the air cleaner. Inside the design, not as much of a departure from the IONIQ 5. Here it's almost identical. All the switchgear is the same. The two 12.3-inch diagonal screens are the same. However, they've made some tweaks that I have to say are more functional here than in the crossover version of this. Number one, the door panels. The whole thing has this very unique armrest, which means there's a door pull the whole way through the door, and that works in conjunction with a very unique design of speaker grille here that's reminiscent of the Burmester in like a Mercedes. Then there's a design trick that you and I have not seen since like European cars of the mid-80s, the window switches. They are not on the door panel, they're on the center console. I've always thought this was a better way to package window switches because your hand naturally falls here to control all four windows. There's also the door lock as well as the auto hold here. Then there are the keys. Not so much the design of the keys, which kind of reminiscent of the design of the car. Rather, one doesn't need these keys because like the IONIQ 5, it's fitted with a digital key system. This one a second generation. And then while we're talking about digital bits here, the OS can be updated over the air. Then there are the materials here. Now, we've talked about this in many other cars, not just the IONIQ 5, recyclable materials used in the construction of the vehicle. I get it, people with EVs want the whole vegan interior, and that's the case here. One of the things, and before you shoot me, do some research, recyclable bottles, for example. You would think, hey, we're at 100%, we're nowhere near it. It's like 5 to 10%, and that information is coming from Greenpeace of all places. So that's why I'm not a huge believer in doing recyclable materials on the inside of these vehicles. Then there's the carpet, and here, like the rest of the interior, they're using the theme of recyclable materials. But unlike plastic bottles or say wallpaper, here they're using recycled fishnets. Now this is an industry I will admit I do not know. So any of you that understand that industry or how they recycle fishnets, let me know in the comments below what percentage of fishnets actually get recycled. Either way, that is what the carpet is made out of, and that's something that I haven't seen in other electric vehicles. Now circling back to the whole packaging discussion, the rear seat. And this is where I would sit as a 6-footer, which leaves me a ridiculous amount of room in the rear seat. But that's not the only trick with packaging. Remember the door panels up front? It's a similar trick back here, but not just for the door pulls, but where to store one's phone. There is a place in front of the smaller speaker grille to store a phone here, as well as 2 chargers in the back. The only thing I would complain about in the packaging in the rear, the hip point, meaning where you'd sit, the height of your ass, is kind of low. So yeah, I get it. It gives one more headroom even with a sunroof, but it feels kind of weird back here. I feel like almost a second-class citizen. Now, yes, you and I could go on and on about more technical items, like an aero covering running the length of the vehicle, similar to the IONIQ 5. And then, of course, the eco mode that runs only in rear-wheel drive, even on all-wheel drive models like the IONIQ 5. And then, most importantly, there is the architecture of charging, 800 volts, which means 10 to 80% in 18 minutes. But we have to put all that aside because it's really about the design. And there's good news and there's bad news. The good news is no Russian nesting doll syndrome like Mercedes has done in large, medium, and soon to be small. Here it's a unique design that, yes, it stands out, but that's where we get to the bad news. Here I can't honestly say that it is achingly beautiful like the IONIQ 5. That stood out because it harkened back to Giugiaro's 1974 Golf design that set the stage for hatches and subsequently hot hatches for years to come. And here it reimagines it in a completely different size. There's a lot of things going on in design, but at the same time, it's simple with that one line that does make it more form follows function than aesthetically pleasing. Which brings us to the wish list. And here I have two things. Number one, while spending a lot of time filming the B-roll with Jim, I noticed they put all this work into the coefficient of drag, but the side windows on the daylight opening are not mounted flush. I could only imagine if there was a little bit budget paid to that maybe it would be 0.21 with flush mounted side windows. I know that's a lot to ask. And then second, you know I'm gonna say it, pricing. The IONIQ 5 is great and it's selling way beyond expectations, even at $50,000 and $55,000 base prices for the very fancy ones, and they're going over sticker, but that's in our bizarro economy. So my wish list back to Hyundai, can we have this cheaper, the IONIQ 5? And when I say cheaper, I mean like low 30s. But this is one man's opinion, and this is the point of the episode where I turn this around to you guys to opine in the comments below, or via our social media, MotoManTV, all one word, MotoManTV, all one word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, I do need to leave you with something a little bit behind the scenes about where we are shooting. This is a car studio that's in Fountain Valley, California. So I'm shooting on what's known as a car psych. It's this white facility where you have to walk around with little booties on your shoes. And you may remember that in our Santa Cruz as well as IONIQ 5 episode, I was shooting with the booties on my shoes. So I was fully prepared to try something different in this episode. So I wore special socks. And I wanted to show off that we were shooting here in Los Angeles. But apparently when I turned up this morning, these shoe Nazis decided not to come into work today, and thus I was able to wear my shoes. Which brings us to the point where I still have to show off my socks. Till I see you in the next episode, bis später.